Hanging on a sec. There we
Oh,
go. Good morning. I know, I was waiting for Facebook. Sorry, folks. Now I'll say good morning. And welcome to History Matters, and so does coffee. Um, we have a big topic. Wait, Annie, hold your cup up again.
the History Matters cup,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Thank you. So today we have a big topic to discuss, which I'm going to talk about in a specific way. We're going to be talking about citizenship. I wonder why. But before we launch into that, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History. I am delighted to be here with you today. Um, and if this is your first time joining, we are so happy to have you. We will have a discussion for about 30 minutes. Joanne will talk about today's topic. Everybody will continue to engage in the chat. But if you have questions about today's topic, I would love for you to add those down below in the Q&A. That's where I will look for them in about 30 minutes.
Cool. Okay. And as Annie said, welcome. See, I already forgotten. 264? I've already forgotten which episode number it is. They told me literally 2 seconds ago.
264, you were correct.
Okay, 264. She said out of the darkness. Okay, I do want to explicitly welcome folks who are here for the first time or one of the first times. This is the 264th episode of History Matters. And if you tell folks that you're here for the first time, you will get a warm welcome from the History Matters community. And Rosie, the Resistance Bird, clearly is welcoming you too. Okay, a lot of stuff. I want to talk about citizenship. I mean, nowadays, truly, it used to be that I'd sort of ponder where I wanted to reach for a topic for History Matters. Nowadays, it's like, help, there's too many topics. I chose citizenship partly because the Supreme Court this week has determined that it is going to hear the case. Apparently, it's going to hear arguments on May 15th. Put that on your calendar. And supposedly, there will be a decision by late June or early July. Now, what they are responding to is a executive order from President Trump, and you can find it. It's up online, and it declares that it is protecting, quote unquote, the meaning and value of citizenship. I will alert you to look for that word when things are being drastically revised and limited, because very often rights are taken away and it's called protection. So that's a word to watch for. But at any rate, this executive order, and I'm going to mention what it actually does, because I think we've a lot of people have heard only, oh no, it's birthright citizenship, which it is. But he's very specific in the executive order about two groups of people that he wants to be excluded from birthright citizenship. And it's important to note that, not that it matters less, but that it's obviously tied in with a lot of other things he's doing. Okay, so he says, number one, people will not have birthright citizenship when that person's mother was unlawfully present in the United States and the person's father was not a United States citizen, or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth, or when that person's mother's presence in the United States was lawful but temporary, and the person's father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth. Okay, so he's going after it's another way to go after the immigrant population. It's another way to go after people who are here for whatever reason, asylum, or are here illegally. It's obviously plugged into a lot of the other things that Trump is doing. But I wanted to be clear about what the clause does. I'm going to be talking about its broader implications today. So that's the executive order. It's going to the Supreme Court because a lot of states have challenged the order and basically arguing that, and I think this is a quote from their Supreme Court brief, for over a century, it has been the settled view of this court, Congress, the executive branch, and legal scholars that the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause guarantees citizenship to babies born in the United States, regardless of their parents' citizenship, allegiance, domicile, immigration status, or nationality. Okay, so that's pretty clear. And so this has bounced its way through courts, um, some of them, blocking the executive order again and again. A Reagan-appointed judge in Washington State said the executive order was, quote, blatantly unconstitutional. Okay, so that's where we are. Watch for this in May. What I want to do is talk a little bit more broadly about citizenship, because I think there's an assumption that it's a, left and right. Well, I was going to say black and white, and in some ways it has been that in the past, but that there's a clear line and always has been regarding who is a citizen and who isn't. And I'm going to talk briefly about citizenship in the pre-Civil War period. I'm then going to talk about the 14th Amendment briefly, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about contesting citizenship and the 14th Amendment, because you'll see the different ways in which, number one, initially people were doing all kinds of things to get citizenship, how a line was drawn with the 14th Amendment and what that has done thereafter. Okay, obviously, this is not going to be comprehensive in any way. I'm going to do all of this within the next 22 minutes. I will. I just want to get a larger look at the arc in a very broad way of citizenship as we come up on this discussion, very important discussion that is now going to begin with the Supreme Court. Okay, so first, let's talk briefly about citizenship before the Civil War. Now, this is really fascinating, in part because it's really fascinating, and in part because much of what I'm going to be talking about here comes from the dissertation of my wonderful graduate student, Emily Yankowitz, who I formally voted for. I think that this last Tuesday, the faculty gets together and votes yes on PhDs. So I officially got to vote yes on giving her her PhD, which is wonderful. And her dissertation is about citizenship in the pre-Civil War period, roughly. And the major point that she makes, and she looks at it, oh, there's a little applause. Thank you. That's very nice. Emily, you're being applauded. The general point that she makes, and she does it in a lot of different ways, really fascinating ways, is that there were not clear lines about citizenship in this pre-Civil War period, that it was very amorphous. She even says, and this is a paraphrase of what she says in her dissertation, citizenship wasn't a status. It was negotiated. It was a process. And she shows how different times, different places, people were trying to figure out how to become citizens and manipulating the system because the system was amorphous, very personal, and ground level. So, for example, she has a chapter on loyalists after the war, trying to figure out how they can, who left and now they want to come back and re-enter the new country, and they're trying to figure out the best way to do it. And different states had different standards of citizenship. So they shop sometimes to find the way in. I think she says the Connecticut becomes a waiting room for New York. I believe that's what she says. Anyway, you would think there's one national standard. There definitely is not in this period. And of course, people know it, and they're trying to put that to use to their own benefit. She talks about sailors at sea having to, what is their status, their citizenship status when they bump up against another country? That becomes an issue. She talks about how do people who want to take federal office prove they're citizens, because you actually have to be a citizen to hold federal office at that time. What do you do to prove it? There's not necessarily one thing you can do to prove it. And throughout it, she talks about the ways in which even passports were created, but various documents of citizenship. She talks about the negotiation process, meaning sometimes to become a citizen, you needed someone to bear witness and say, yeah, I know this guy and he's lived here for 10 years. Or you needed to describe them somehow and have a witness say yes to that, or you needed the friend of a friend to write a letter. In other words, it's a negotiation, and people of all kinds were negotiating their way through this. It's not how we think about citizenship. Again, we think of it as a legal status, which now it is, but it wasn't then. So what that means is there was no absolute stark line of what it meant to be a citizen or not to be a citizen. That, and I will say actually also, she found all of these passports from the time period, which is amazing. And states gave passports, the national government gave passports. I mean, honestly, whenever this becomes a book, you have to go find the book. But at any rate, there are no stark lines drawn. So this is the background to the 14th Amendment in many ways, right? When the 14th Amendment comes along and says, okay, like, and I'm going to read it in a moment. This is what it is to be a citizen, and it's a big category, and it's defined, and it's an amendment to the Constitution. That's a big change from before, when people were kind of working their way through a really amorphous system. Now, before I get to the 14th Amendment, I do want to, I cannot talk about citizenship. I need more coffee. Without at least mentioning the Dred Scott decision from 1857, which is just before the Civil War. Okay. So in the Dred Scott decision, there was an enslaved person, Dred Scott, who was living in a free state and territory, but was enslaved. And he petitioned for his freedom and was essentially told he cannot get his freedom. And this will be a big paraphrase, but he could not get his freedom because African Americans were not and could never be citizens of the United States. It even said, the Supreme Court decision, which I'll come back to in a moment, that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 that drew a line across the nation and said free state, slave state, above the line, below the line, was unconstitutional. So the Chief Justice at the time, Roger B. Taney, clearly took this opportunity to make a sweeping statement about slavery at the peak moment of its controversy, thinking, this is what I think, this can solve the problem, bang. It's a horrible Supreme Court decision. And, you know, even at the time, maybe some Southerners were pleased, but a lot of people at the time, many people in the North, were horrified by it. And it doesn't solve anything, and it just adds fire to the controversy by bringing it up in a different form, in a different category, with big implications. So that's the general story. Taney used this case to supposedly impose a judicial solution on the slavery question. And he even actually, I have my notes here and I had forgotten about Kansas, Nebraska. He didn't even like the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So you have the Missouri Compromise in 1820 that draws the line, right? And it's supposedly going to solve the problem, although Thomas Jefferson says it's a fire bell in the night because now we'll never escape from the problem of slavery. It's going to come to get us sooner or later. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 says, you know what? Let's make this different. Let's allow new states to decide their slavery status through popular sovereignty. So it essentially says, yeah, the Missouri Compromise line was nice and interesting, but let's let people choose. And Taney says, I don't even like that. I don't even think that that's constitutional. So he makes a big, big, big sweeping claim. And as I said, some Southerners are very happy. There's a newspaper at the time that says within it, quote, the Southern opinion upon the subject of Southern slavery is now the supreme law of the land. Okay. Now, obviously, now comes the Civil War and then the 14th Amendment, which steps right in and deals with this issue. I want to read the first section of the 14th Amendment because on a whole bunch of levels, we need to hear it. Okay, this is the first section of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the man, I'm having problems speaking this morning, jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Any person within its jurisdiction. Imagine that. They have the equal protection of the laws. Okay, so the 14th Amendment, we're going to be hearing a lot about it. Now you know the clause, it has to do with citizenship, it has to do with due process. It's about what you are owed as a citizen and who is a citizen. And again, it's big, it's sweeping. It's saying, okay, no more cutting out groups, marginalizing people, deciding who's in and who's out in the way that has been happening for a long time. Okay. However, this didn't necessarily, obviously, solve the problem, right? It draws a line, the 14th Amendment, about who is a citizen. And that has a few different implications. On the one hand, it means that people who want to fight for citizenship, they have something to point to. They have a constitutional amendment. They have a way in which they can fight for citizenship by relying on the Constitution, right? And that's major. And they can also very obviously point to the 14th Amendment when lines are crossed concerning citizenship. But of course, once that kind of line is drawn, that kind of generous line, there are going to be people who are going to be very determined to not let it stand on a personal level, in their home, how they deal with people. Ironically, the 14th Amendment, in some ways, puts people in an early America frame of mind in which, yeah, you have an amendment, but we're here and we deal with citizenship on our own. Now, they're not necessarily declaring you are not a citizen, but they are very blatantly treating some people like citizens and others like less than citizens. Now, there are all kinds of ways in which, again, people, Black and white, were fighting for citizenship, for Black Americans specifically, and had the 14th Amendment to defend that right. So that the amendment is vitally important, and in part, it's important for being in the Constitution and now being constitutional, and important for providing people with a tool to demand citizenship. For all of those reasons, it's important. Of course, that doesn't mean that citizenship can't be tampered with. So I'm only going to mention this briefly, but again, I can't talk about citizenship without at least touching on this. And that has to do with Japanese internment camps in the beginning of World War II. Because there you have a case in which the government is worried about Japanese people in America and people of Japanese descent. In the second category, many of them are citizens. They're American citizens. And regardless of that, the government declares them dangerous people. Maybe they're spies. Somehow they're going to make trouble. And of course, all of this fear and terror is partly caused by the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. So there's an attack, and the government responds by saying, okay, we're going to round up everybody that's remotely connected to this and then put them somewhere because this is scary. That's the very oversimplified logic of what goes on. But again, that's not just people of Japanese descent, not just people who are Japanese, but people of Japanese descent, which is huge. I think I read, and someone can check me on this if you choose, I think I read that 120,000 Americans ultimately were put in these internment camps, or sometimes, as they were called, assembly centers, the language, folks. And 70,000 of the 120,000 were actually US citizens, rounded up and put in camps. There were objections made at the time, but in the end, the West Coast, because of Pearl Harbor, was deemed a military area. And a military area can be controlled by the US Army, by the US military. So this went through this, play of the cards in which the West Coast is deemed a military area. It's divided into military zones. It gives military commanders permission to exclude civilians from military areas. And although all of this does not specifically mention the Japanese, it very quickly is put in force against Japanese people and people of Japanese descent. So that's how you get to that point. And that's also worth noting is the guardrails hold up. People say it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. And then the government finds a way to go past that and use the military as a way to lock up citizens. In this case, not using the military with guns and threats, but using the military because of the rules that govern the military in the United States. Anyway, again, citizenship and ways in which it's negotiated in a very different way in the early American period that my grad student, Emily Yankowitz, writes about. Line drawn, and then different kinds of negotiations thereafter. And I need to mention that in 1988, as recent as 1988, President Reagan passed Public Law 100-383, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, that acknowledged that internment was unjust, apologized for it, and gave a $20,000 cash payment to every person who had been incarcerated under it. Okay, so that's the very long arc that I've just sort of laid out there in a remarkably brief amount of time. And I'm already twitching as a historian because it was so general and so vague. But my larger point here is citizenship, on the one hand, has always been fought for, has always been valued. We don't need an executive order to show us that it needs to be valued. We have always valued it. It has always been a contentious issue. People have always been trying to find ways to push people in or out. I was gonna wait to mention this book, but I'll mention it now because the phrase is so wonderful. If you're interested in this issue in the pre-Civil War period, go find Martha Jones's book, Birthright Citizens: A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America. She has a phrase in that book when she's talking about citizenship. She says it's, quote, national belonging that in part is being debated. National belonging. Who belongs? Who's an us and who's a them? That's a deeper, more profound way of thinking about citizenship. And we live in a moment when that category, us versus them, is being defined in all kinds of ways, interesting ways, and it's unclear if and how that's going to happen, and if and how people will be responding. Now, this executive order saying that these categories of people no longer have birthright citizenship, it's on shaky constitutional ground, but it chips away at over a century of understanding of the basis of citizenship and a line that people could use to push for it. It denies even the chance of saying this is an absolute rule. The 14th Amendment matters. The language in it means something. We'll find out what the language in it means, in part, by looking at what the Supreme Court says in May. But this is trimming away birthright citizenship from groups of people. And once you begin that process, which in itself shouldn't be happening, that can continue to happen in different ways. Birthright citizenship, in many ways, does determine national belonging. And when you're pushing people out of that state of belonging, you're essentially pushing them out of the United States and making them a them. So my larger point here is what we're talking about when we talk about citizenship is, of course, a legal issue. And of course, an issue about immigrants and their status in this country. Um, it's also an issue, and this is not going to surprise anyone, but I'll say it anyway. It's an issue about the kind of nation we want to be. Do we want to have standards that we abide by? Do we want to have an understanding of citizenship that means something? Do we want people who come here to understand what being a citizen means and to value that? Because American citizenship is invaluable, right? In and of itself. American citizenship, from the beginning of the arc I talked about, people are trying to get it. They try to get it for all kinds of reasons. But it's something that, as long as there's been a United States, people have worked for. Of course, as long as there's been a United States, people have pushed against. But that's the point. An executive order claiming to be protecting citizenship in the United States is by chipping away some of the original meaning. As I said at the outset, protecting is an interesting choice of words, maybe redefining. And once you begin that process of deciding who belongs and who doesn't, that's a dangerous precedent. And it's unfair to the people who are here under the terms of having been born here and they're citizens. It on so many levels, I'm sputtering because it makes me so angry. But on so many levels, um, this is one I realize of many remarkably unjust or unbelievable executive orders that we're seeing these days. Many of them touch on what the American people are, have been, and want to be, who we are, our national identity. This one does it in a big way. This one, and we're already seeing in a different form by students with visas. They're here legally, being told that they need to leave. In a couple cases, even American citizens being detained for one reason or another. We're looking at the repercussions of deciding that citizenship is a tool and not a right. And that's what we need to bear in mind here. The real meaning of citizenship. I won't read it now because it's long, but I did actually go to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website, it's a government website, to look up the rights and responsibilities of citizens as defined on that website. I'll be happy to go back and read it later. I'm out of time right now, and I want to open up this discussion. But if citizenship is so valuable, then we need to be fair and measured and just and historically informed about what we do with it. We need to think about national belonging not in a channeled, small-minded kind of way, but in a way that embraces the ideals and principles of the American nation. Okay, off the soapbox. Putting the notes down here. Open in chat. Okay. I missed all the chat and I see, as ever, dramatic things, give yourself time to recover, people's, okay. Oh, Mug, okay. Oh my gosh.
They're making up for lost time. I think they've chatted 4 weeks worth today.
Okay, so Mug, so it's worth knowing, for those who are new here, and I think there are many new people here, every week for 264 weeks. Yeah, I forgot it. I tell you, I don't know what it is, but 264 weeks. I have had a mug that in one way or another reflects on the topic under debate, and I do not have 264 mugs. So they've been used in a variety of different creative ways. This one, its relevance will be obvious.
Yay.
This one,
When you got that one.
this one is dedicated to a topic that supposedly we're not supposed to be teaching or learning about. Heaven forbid we learn things like the history of denying people citizenship and the way in which it was used uh, in a racist kind of a way. So anyway, that's my book.
So, Joanne, this week, Gilder Lehrman finally put out the African American AP study guide.
I noticed that. I didn't get a chance to look at it, but I know.
Oh, well, you have to because we have 40 items in there. They asked us to collaborate. And I
Okay.
was so excited. And my sister, we were talking about my brother and sister before you logged on. It was so funny. My sister called and said, I never thought I'd see my little sister in the same email as Henry Louis Gates.
Oh, well, can someone? Oh, there you go. Tim just put it up.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. And
that's really exciting. Well,
several
then I'll go
people
look
have
at it.
contacted me this week and said, these are awesome. Thank you. So it was like one of the best projects we worked on this year.
Okay, thank you for telling me that because I saw it and I was like, cool, sometime I'll have to go back and look, but now sometime will come much sooner.
There
Very
is.
cool.
We
Congratulations.
have thank you. We have lots of great questions. I'm going to start with my friend Dale because he's from Williamsburg and that's where I was down by that way this week. So Dale says, in quotes, subject to the jurisdiction thereof seems to be the part that is contentious. Why would that be?
Well,
Subject.
right. So that it has been contentious in a variety of ways for a long time. What does it mean? Now, supposedly, and I did not have time to research this in great detail, so I cannot sort of offer you my absolute evidence-based blessing on this. But supposedly, initially, meant that was supposed to be referring to children of diplomats and some Native Americans, depending on their tribe's relation to the United States government. Now, I read that. I cannot attest to it, but supposedly it had a specific meaning, but it is a general phrase. And it has been debated again and again and again and again. And so obviously that's the constitutional hook that this administration is trying to use to get a hold of it. I encourage you to look up, there you go. Jim, not Tim. I encourage you to, that's right, Native Americans, to look up things like limiting clause citizenship, and this is what I began to do this morning and realized I could not track down this conversation in the amount of time I have to prepare this. But it is a contentious issue for precisely the reason that you're asking the question.
Yeah. And then as a follow-up, Pax, our good friend Pax asks, it says born or naturalized in quotes. What did naturalized mean back then?
Well, that changed, like what it meant to be naturalized and become a citizen. Certainly, that also was something that was debated and changed over time. Like how many years do you have to be here before you can be naturalized as an American citizen? So, when the government first starts, they're already in the 1790s debating this and for partisan reasons, trying to make it a longer time you have to wait. If like actually Hamilton is afraid that, ironically, immigrants in the late 1790s are going to be Jeffersonian Republicans. So let's think about naturalization. So it's been a political tool in one way or another, and it's changed in its meaning. That's a step of holding back citizenship, but it is still leaving the process in place. So you can argue about that. You can argue against it. You can, and particularly if that is pushed to crazy standards, um, that can be an issue in and of itself. But you can see how it's on the road to um, just denying people citizenship.
Yeah. And Sydney, one of our favorite college students and members of our community, tuned in a little late, but we are so happy to have Sydney back. Cindy says, what defines a citizen? Is it a legal status? Is it a person who participates in a society regardless of legal status? So I think that a lot of young people I hear this question from college students and younger, that you can still practice good citizenship even if you're not a US citizen. So I'm dying to know your answer to this
Oh
question.
boy. Well, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna give you a historian answer. It's complicated. On the one hand, it is a legal status, and that's some of what we're arguing about now, is that you are legally declared a citizen, and that confers upon you certain rights. However, you can also be a good citizen, meaning someone who is responsible in this country that they're in, even if they're not a legal citizen. Being a good citizen in that broader sense means being a good member of this community, I suppose you could say in part. Um, so there's a legal status and then there's a broader definition. Obviously, that sounds like a clear, stark line, and even that can have an amorphous area. I actually, this, Sydney, I want to read this from that website, that government website I found, because it kind of touches on this too. Um, it says several rights and responsibilities that all citizens should exercise and respect. Some of these are legally required of every citizen, not all of them. All are important to ensuring that America remains a free and prosperous nation. So even here, they're saying some of these things have to do with legal citizenship, and some of these things are just good things to do, which sort of relates more to being a good citizen. But I'm just going to name a few of them, partly because it's really interesting to know what the government says are the rights of citizens. Freedom to express yourself, freedom to worship as you wish, the right to a prompt, fair trial by jury, the right to vote in elections for public officials, the right to apply for federal employment requiring U.S. citizenship, the right to run for elected office, the freedom to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, this is from the government website. I'll just say the right to a prompt, fair trial by jury and freedom to express yourself. The government tells us we have that right as citizens, so I'll just leave that there. And then it says, has a list of responsibilities to citizens. And those, are more in the category of being a good citizen, like stay informed of the issues affecting your community, respect and obey federal, state, and local laws, respect the rights, beliefs, and opinions of others. So those have to do with an attitude of belonging and a way of opening that and defining that in a humane way and in a way that is aligned with our broad understanding of citizenship as American citizens. So that more falls into the second category of what Sydney is asking.
Yeah, and several people have asked which website you're quoting that
Oh
from.
yeah, let me
If you just say it, Tim will type it.
yeah, it is the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website.
Okay, I'm sure Tim or Jim or
Oh,
somebody
there
will.
you go. Tim put it up. And I
Yep.
think it even says on the top of the page, this is a government website. Here's how you can tell. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, and who knows if that website will be up next week,
Well,
right? Because
that
half of them are coming down,
I took a photo.
right? Well, and that's a whole that could be a whole other topic for another week. But
It could be a whole
I
other.
did want to say, I had put in the chat, but in kindergarten through third grade, the whole social studies curriculum was about being a good citizen, being a good neighbor, right? Not as a legal entity, just
It's true.
we want you to become a good human. And it just seems like the older we get, the more we forget those lessons. There was that book, Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, and it's true. You
Right. Well, this is the eternal, like, we don't learn civics anymore kind of discussion, which, well, we won't talk about that here, but that becomes
That's another week.
that is a different week. Okay.
All right. So Barbara, I'm not sure which Barbara because it says iPhone Barbara because we have a few Barbaras, but one of our favorite Barbaras asks, do you think it's time for a new amendment to clarify the presidential limits
Wow.
for this,
Um,
given this topic and many others?
Well, uh, would I think that's a good idea? Yes. An amendment to the Constitution. Whenever someone says that, I always, on the one hand, say what that would be a fine idea, and on the other hand, I say, oh man, to go through that process. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but that's not an easy solution. It is true. I know this isn't quite what we're talking about today, but and we've talked about this before, that we live in a time when the need for guardrails is more apparent than ever before, and we didn't know that they weren't there. And now there are people pushing us towards the edge. So we might need constitutional guardrails of various sorts that we didn't realize we needed because people were behaving according to democratic norms and not trying to push people over the edge. So But yes, I think it would be wise, particularly given the Supreme Court decision about immunity, which, yeah, I said online somewhere in the last week, um, I can't even remember where or why I was saying it. I was talking about the fact that I was at a Zoom meeting with a group of historians right after that decision was announced about presidential immunity, and the look on everyone's face, it was like, I mean, we all knew that that fundamentally changed the nation. That was it. Like something fundamental about democracy had just been erased. Um, so, that's my larger point is that yes, I think we do, particularly given Supreme Court decisions. But again, the process doing that will be a process, a long process.
Okay, our good friend Daniel Abramovich asks the basic question from this SCOTUS: does hearing arguments on something clearly illegal amount to a victory for President Trump? He's thinking of last year's immunity case.
Right. Um, I mean, I suppose I suppose in one way you could say it does because it's been pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and judge after judge after judge after judge has said nope, 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 nope. So now it's going to be heard. It's going to be heard in part because all of these other courts have stood up against it, so there's nowhere else to take it, and it is a sweeping national issue. So I suppose you could say the fact that it's now going to be debated is a kind of victory. And that's about as far as I would go. I'm not even gonna, I'm gonna be a historian and not state what I predict the outcome will be of this case, because we do not live in times where everything is predictable. And as much as we're all sitting here thinking about what we think might happen, it might not. And I'll come back to this if necessary. We have a little more time. Okay, I'll make a sentence or two here. It's really important to note, and this has to do with everything, including citizenship. If you say we're at a dire time, I think I said we're not at a moment, this is another online pontification. This isn't a moment when you ask, is this a bad administration? This is a moment when you ask, will we have another administration? Now, I some people responded to that by saying, don't give the people in power powers they don't have. And that's true. And I certainly am not saying that's going to happen at all. But I do think to understand the moment we're in, we have to understand possibilities. Even if they are not right, even if they shouldn't be able to happen, we have to at least acknowledge, okay, like these things are now in debate. These things are now, sort of metamorphosing in a variety of kinds of ways that are really threatening. There is a threat. We don't know the outcome. So it's not someone said to me, you're surrendering. It's like, I'm definitely not surrendering. As a matter of fact, I'm doing the opposite. I'm trying to get people to see that this is a moment really to stand up. Not that it's over, but it's an important moment. So I mentioned that only because that's an interesting sort of fuzzy line that when you step forward and say, big risk, we're in big trouble. And then people say, why are you like suggesting it's over? Why are you telling us to surrender? They're not the same thing. Anyway, I'll stop. That's not our topic. Maybe that's another topic for another week.
Yeah, Laura Niven had a similar question. She asked why the Supreme Court was even hearing this case. So,
Yeah.
All right. So Kathleen V, our good friend, says, what role does Congress play in ensuring citizenship, even temporary citizenship? She's thinking of the Garcia case, but she also knows an acquaintance from China who had their green card revoked for no reason. And so she's wondering, is all of this completely in the hands of the executive branch?
Right. Well, that's a question I can answer in a very specific way right now. And that is that Congress has basically ceded its power to the executive branch. They're just not pushing back. They're not asserting their rights. They're not performing their duty as, a check and a balance. In this moment, you can't uniformly categorically answer the question about what Congress has the right to do, because it's one thing to say it can or can't do this. It's another thing to say it will or won't do this. And if it won't, then the right doesn't matter anyway. And right now we're in a moment where they just won't, right? I mean, the Republicans in power are just um, allowing the president to do as he wants. Um, and Congress is not checking anything. So that's another um, sort of indication, amazing, risky, terrifying, edge-pushing thing that's happening right now. Checks and balances are important for a reason. An executive that's so powerful that Congress doesn't matter, that the founders would have said that was moving to tyranny territory.
Yeah, we have quite a few other people just in the chat, in the Q&A, asking like, why are they even hearing this case? Dave, John Howell asks, has the 14th Amendment birthright citizenship been tested in SCOTUS before this? Has it previously been tested?
Oh, that I actually don't know definitively. And I don't want to say yes or no because I actually don't know that.
And then Victoria Murphy is asking, under what circumstances can citizenship be revoked and by whom? Can this be done to native born and naturalized citizens equally?
I encourage you to actually go read the 14th Amendment because, well, I read you section 1. There are other sections that talk about things like um, what happens to your citizenship if you perform a treasonous act or insurrection, and how that might affect whether you can or can't be a citizen. Which is why this was being discussed in a variety of ways not that long ago. At any rate, so that in part, the 14th Amendment begins to list things, and insurrection is a big one, that can affect your right to be a citizen.
Cynthia wanted to know if you could speak to due process as it applies to non-citizens.
Everyone who is here deserves due process. They just do. Due process, due. They are due to people, right? We don't say, oh, some people have rights and other people, we can do whatever we want to them. There's a due process. That's the rule of law. And laws here apply to everybody. I mean, if you're saying that people who are here and are not citizens don't deserve due process, then are they covered by the rule of law? Can they commit a crime and then be charged with a crime? And if they can, they deserve a fair trial. So yeah, due process is not, again, it's not a political tool. It's not something you can give and take with thoughtlessly. And if you're doing it thoughtfully, if you're taking away due process thoughtfully, then you are absolutely stating that you do not believe in the rule of law. And that if someone does something you don't like, you can deport them, punish them, and then say, whoop, I did that. I guess that's over, and I'm really sorry. But that maybe they should have had a trial. I don't know, but they don't have to. I mean, I don't have to go marching down that little road of possibility, but the implications of what's going on right now in El Salvador, the person who's being held in El Salvador, are bone chilling, because the president is paying them to imprison this person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even a matter of a president not fighting to help a person get out of another country. This president is paying them to imprison this person. Just let that sit on your shoulders for a while. Okay.
Freda, our friend from Erie, PA, asks, is there a better or more inclusive term to use in general sense than citizen? She says she sometimes urges people to say resident, but she's looking for a more inclusive term and wondered if you had any
Well,
suggestions.
that's interesting. And actually, in Emily Ankowitz's dissertation, she starts out by talking about all the different words that would appear on documents. In that sense, this gets back, I think it was to Sydney's question or someone's question. It is a legal status, right? So you're right. It does have bounds to it. But it depends, as a bigger term, it depends on what you're referring to. You could say resident in one sense. You could say constituent in a more political sense. I don't know if I have the absolute perfect word. Um, oh, there. Courtney says countrymen. Well, countrymen. I don't know. But at any rate, I'm not a countryman. Uh, but anyway, I think you're correct that particularly in this time where citizenship is being debated, calling people citizens needs to be thought through. It has a meaning.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
put in the chat with younger kids, we a lot of times, especially like where I was in Charlottesville, we had such a high immigrant population. We like to use the word neighbor.
yeah.
You know,
Oh,
kids all identify with the word neighbor.
neighbor is good. Inhabitant. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Kevin Johnson asked, why would the SCOTUS take up a case like this? The lower courts already decided it. Are they taking it up to sanction the Trump agenda? That's a little twist on the same question we had earlier.
Right. Um, Not necessarily, but I think, and I did not read the exchange that led to the Supreme Court saying, okay, we're going to hear this. So I can't absolutely comment on this. But this is not the only case in which Trump has been banging on the doors of courts trying to get something passed and then hoping that the Supreme Court will finally say, okay, it's an issue, we'll take it up, which is essentially what happened here. But I don't know the final, give and take that led to the Supreme Court formally taking it up. And it's a good question.
Yeah. Okay, Kara Lee asks, since birthright citizenship was established with the Wong Kim art case, would you agree that this push against birthright citizenship is an extension of anti-Asian hate or American traditions of xenophobia?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, all of the instances post 14th Amendment that I mentioned, right? Pushing against Black Americans, pushing against Native Americans, pushing against Asian Americans, go all the way back, right? For naturalization, pushing against Irish immigrants who at some point in the past weren't considered white, right? Pushing against it, absolutely, that's what it's about. I mean, imagine not being able to teach about how racism is embedded in the American political and legal system. This is not, to admit that is not to condemn the United States to hell. It's to acknowledge a longstanding problem. And if you want to fix it, you have to accept the fact that it's there. And so, yes, the short answer to that question is yeah.
Yeah. Martha Wales asks, what about Senator Murkowski talking about threats if she or any citizen do what the administration doesn't like?
Right. So that I'm I'm still deciding what I want to say about that because I think I want to write about that. And for those of you who missed it, I don't know who she was speaking to, but she was speaking before a group of people. You might be able to find it for me. Um, and in essence, she said she was not speaking out because she was scared of retaliation. And she said that that's what others were doing too. They were not speaking out because they were scared. Now, on the one hand, her saying that blatantly, openly, on camera, in public to a group of people is really good because at least it's exposing the fact of this administration in some ways. I don't, I have a word and I'm trying to decide whether I want to use it or not. that there's a mafioso-like retaliation game being played by this administration in which if you do the wrong thing, if you do something they don't like, then bad things are going to happen. And the fact that lots of people, including getting back to the Congress question, members of Congress are deciding that at this moment, they're not going to step up and they're not going to say anything because they're scared. Not only does that leave the American people without a rudder, without any, formal systemic way to do anything, it abandons us and it deconstructs the government as well. It if you can't do your job because you're too scared to do it, that's a stopping point that requires that has to be exposed and discussed. Um, that to me, there have been moments um, in the semi-recent past that things have happened, and I have known in that moment, that's a moment. Like, I'm going to stop. I'm going to watch this. I'm going to think about it. Maybe I'm going to write about it because, whoa. And some of them are not dire like this. I know I've mentioned this um, before, but when there was a gun uh, protest, gun rights protest for, making it harder to get guns I believe it was the House, and the House turned off the cameras. It was overnight, right? It was like a long protest, and the House turned off the cameras. So the members of Congress who were there took out their cell phones,
Right.
were showing what was happening, and that was being put out. That blew my mind
Mm-hmm.
because as someone who obviously, those of you who know me know how interested I am in the mechanics and technology of democracy and the press. And there, at that moment, people said, you know what? We don't need the press. We don't need your stinking cameras, right? We don't need it's okay, oh, come on, give me the name of Blazing Saddles. Thank you. At any rate, that was a moment in which these people said, you know what? We're going to do this ourselves. We don't need you. We don't need the reporters. We don't need the cameras. The American people need to see this. I stayed up to a ridiculously late hour because I just was amazed and fascinated by what I was seeing. And, um, a senator saying, I'm too scared to speak up, that's another one.
Mm-hmm.
We've known it before. It's been written about before. It's not news. But for a senator to say that on the record publicly, this is the problem. We're all scared. Now it's not like, oh, they're lurking behind the scenes. They're a bunch of cowards. They're scared. Now here is a part of government that is inactive because of threats. Now it's a structural issue, and now it has to do with our rights to be represented in Congress. So again, I'm processing this. My book talks about how Northerners in the antebellum Congress before the Civil War were afraid of Southerners, were afraid that they'd get beaten or challenged to a duel. So they decided not to say anything when it came to slavery. Very similar issue, right? Oh, as one an Ohio congressman puts it, he's a fighting man, Southerner willing to duel. I'm not going up against him. Same thing, where fear of what might happen silences and paralyzes a big group of legislators. We can't act. That's what we're seeing now. And this is what I want to think about and write about. And I have thoughts, but I'm not going to blast them here because I'm still thinking through it. But as I said before, this to me is a big a moment of significance, and I hope that it will be discussed as such. And I suppose I have a responsibility to write about it and help because it's now structural. It's not gossip. It's not like tisk tisk, they're cowards. Now it has to do with the structure of our government and checks and balances and our rights as American citizens to have representation.
Yeah. I well, I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Oh,
I'm
wait a
still.
minute. Tim said he wants to know the text of the confidential memo from Wade, Chandler, and Cameron. Um, I don't think it's published anywhere. I found it in the papers of two, I can't remember which two of them, but in the papers of two of them. If you look at the footnote, I think I mentioned a book where at least it's discussed. I can't remember how much of it is in there. There you go. Look at that. You looked at the footnote in the Cameron papers. It's in the Cameron papers, and then I saw it again later in someone else's papers. But I don't know if it's anywhere else in its entirety, other than in manuscript form in archives. I'm not aware that it is. But if it is, my footnote's going to tell you because that was a document that like encapsulated my whole book. And for people who don't know what that is, and then I know we're reaching the end of time. Um, my most recent book, The Field of Blood, Violence in Congress and the Road to Civil War, starts off with a document by three congressmen a few years later looking back to the 1850s and recalling how um, watching Southerners silence Northerners and deny their constituents, Northern congressmen, and deny their constituents a full representation, these three men decided they were going to fight back and they were going to accept challenges to duels. And they knew that they might be ostracized for it, but they felt it was their duty to do this. They talk about the humiliation of the insults and the bullying on the floor. It drips with the emotion of being silenced in that way, and it attests to precisely what it is that I talk about in the book. So it's an amazing document. Um, but or at least let me put it this way, 17 years ago or so, when I began the book and however many years ago when I finished it, I don't think I knew of it being in print anywhere. I'm sorry, I went on and on and on.
Oh
But
no. When you were talking about it being mob-like, I was at a conference on a college campus earlier this week, and the students, someone brought up the mob thing. Someone said something about Trump thinks he's gangster, and one of the kids said Trump's a thug, and I thought that's pretty good. Like,
it is, but I think there's a racist component to that.
yeah.
Like, I think some
I
people,
think that's why the students said it. They said, like, reversing he said, people call us thugs. And this was a young African American male
I
student.
see.
And he said, who's the thug now? Or something like that, And I
Yeah.
think he was trying to turn
And
the
then in that context, then yeah, in that context, mobster wannabes. Um, yeah, in now and then the podcast that I did with Heather Cox Richardson, we did have an episode about in which Carolee, thank you for reminding me, we did explicitly talk about Trump even before he was fully acting like one as a mafia boss. Okay, I realize it's 5 minutes after. So let me explain. Oh, go ahead.
So we got through most of them, and some of them are similar to ones we already answered. So I think we're in pretty good shape. The only one that we didn't get to that it has an interesting twist. Julia was asking, they were talking about the female lawmaker Murkowski talking about how she's afraid to stand up, and she just wondered how that would have been if a male had said that, if a male legislator had said he was afraid.
That would get bigger. That would have a bigger impact
Yeah.
because people would be like, "Oh no, that's
Men
shocking."
are scared? Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
And with women, they're going to be like, well, I have an editorial that I wrote that was published in Atlantic magazine. And the initial title that they suggested was something like, I'm afraid. And I said, there is no freaking way you're going to publish an article by a woman. I'm afraid. Anyway, but I think that it would get more of an impact, undoubtedly. Okay, let me explain what comes next. So we are now going into the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording, but we could talk about whatever we want and be freer and easier with whatever we want to talk about. Um, if you are beaming in from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/ conversations. That's NCHE teach.org/conversations. And then you too, poof, will be in the after party. I just saw someone saying, people in the chat, poof, poof. I'm so predictable. But at any rate, yes, if you go to that website or if you just stay here, poof, you will be in the after party. If you do not stay for the after party, I want to thank you for coming here. I want to thank you for being part of this community in talking about this and any number of other vitally important issues. As I say every week, it's important to be able to do this. It's important that we do this. It's important that other people can do this. Get together in groups and talk about what's happening and come together to understand what it means and what people want to do. We're in a moment where we matter so much. Us. I wrote, us, the United States is us. Yeah. So at any rate, uh, I'm not gonna, James is daring me to say it, and I'm not gonna say it. But at any rate, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie and Claire, and the National Council for History Education, and Jessica and John for making this possible for all of the many weeks, 264. I'm already like doubting myself. Weeks that we've been doing this, that's just mind blowing. And I will see you next week. And I have absolutely no idea what I'll be talking about because that's time we live in. But we'll be here.
We will.
Thank you, Carolee. I'm so proud that I remembered it. We will be here. I don't know the date. I mentioned it only because yes, I'll say it, Tim. We live in a time of extreme contingency. I always say contingency. I didn't say it this week. I have now made you happy. Anyway, we'll meet next weekend and I will be here for sure. My birthday is next weekend. So that's why I was like,
Maybe we're a party hat.
my fascinator. At any rate, I will shut up now since we're over time and we can start the after party.